everybody, I'm Deborah with DC Fine Art, and today we are working on Colored Pencil Part 3. Today I'll be going ahead and recreating and making this picture completely my own by changing up some things. So first off, these reference photos had images of like an old-timey town, or like, not really a town, but like Paris, or like vacation pictures. So this time I decided that I was going to add my little hamster or little mouse. I think it's a little hamster actually. Make his little vacation pictures, because I will be adding him in this piece. So I decided he needed to have a little vacation pictures. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just kind of drawing in something, you know, like him standing next to like these little vase with flowers, and he's on vacation. Maybe he's on a little boat, out in the water. Just something fun. And they're supposed to be like aged old-timey, so I'm trying to keep to that, making it look kind of like aged out. Now, I went ahead and tried to draw him doing like looking at a book, but then I started thinking about it. I was like, okay, he's at the wrong angle, and I didn't really like that, so I decided to draw some cheese. Because you see a lot of people that are on vacation, or just because they love to take pictures of their food. Well, he liked to take pictures of what food he liked, or he or she, and they liked cheese. So after I went ahead and made my little picture, I took my kneaded eraser and just kind of went over it lightly, not to completely get rid of all the lines, because I wanted to be able to see what I drew. I just made it light enough to where the pencil won't show through the color pencil once I work on it. Now I'm taking my, that's the Perfection eraser. And it's a little bit harder of an eraser than the electric eraser that I had. And I can kind of get some fine edges, like on little areas. I got more control, and it's a little bit more stiffer. So yeah, that's the reason why I used it. Now in the pictures, it's like these old-timey pictures, so it's got like the white edges around them. Well, instead of going directly to white, I did want to start out with white is usually your brightest highlights. So instead, I used the Arctic color out of the Derwent Lightfast pencils to go around the picture with it. And that way, it's not my lightest light, so I can go over some little areas in it that I wanted brighter with a white, and it would still show up. So that's why I didn't go with my brightest whites. I went with something else. And you could go with even a lighter gray and stuff like that, like the lightest gray or whatever, and then go over white where your highlights would be. Now the shadow, I would outline it with the sepia 50%, and then I would take like my browns that I would have and go underneath of it for the shadow. So that way, because I have a brown map underneath, I kind of wanted to stick with still the same colors of brown. So I went with like my darker browns for the shadow. Now, if it's something that's super, super dark, like looking like it's black, then I wouldn't go directly with black. I would go with like a dark, in this one here, I went with a dark indigo. And that way it adds more depth than black. Black looks too flat. So you kind of want to stick away from black. Or at least pure black. You want to add some color to that. That way it gives it that depth and not that flat look. Now here I'm making the little clouds. I'm sticking with that old-timey kind of photo look. So I'm still using like browns, but the brown kind of colors, or at least like tans and stuff like that I'm using to create those aged photos are like the dark flesh 5% and the dark flesh 40% as being my darker of the two. And then I went with the flesh pink out of the Derwent ProColour for being like a lighter color. And the dark that you see there that almost looks like it's a black, it's not. It's still the dark indigo, I think. I went over it with the dark indigo, yeah. So now I'm going back over it. I'm making sure that I work from dark to light when it comes to the sky. I'll put the darker, the dark flesh 40%, which is the darker of them, up at the top, and then I'll work my way down using like the dark flesh 5%, which is more of a lighter color, as I work my way down. And now I'm going with the OMS, blending out those colors, getting rid of some of that gritty, grainy look. But I don't want to blend it all like in circles all the way over everything, because then it'll smear it. So I try and work the best that I can with like just the boat and just kind of blend that out within those lines. A little bit, very lightly over the little hamster. I don't want to smear him all out. So I just take little bits at a time. And whenever I go over it with the OMS and I'm going to go from light to dark, I'll usually clean it off in the OMS, my brush, and I'll wipe it off on a cloth-like towel or a Viva paper towel or a shop towel, like those blue shop towels, which one, but more clothy like, not paper like. And I'll try and dry it off. You know, I won't go on there with a sopping wet brush. Now here I'm making my little vase with his little flowers. Doing the highlights with the, I think I actually used the, well, I used some of the Arctic on it, and then the flowers, a little bit of the white, so it's very close. And there, that little bitty pencil that I'm actually running out of, I need to get another one, is the Castell Earth, and that's more of a brownish, like a darker brown, but whenever you blend over it with OMS, it really does have a rich brown to it. So I use that for the table. And here I'm doing the dark flesh 40% and the dark flesh 5%. Working my way down from dark to light for the wall. Now I'm creating his little eyes, and I'm using the dark indigo on that one. Creating some little shadows off to one side. And you don't have to get too detailed with it, or at least I know I didn't. I just kind of stuck with just shadows and not putting in too much detail, because I didn't want to go into that. You know, it's a dark, old, agey photo, so I didn't want to put a whole lot of detail into it. Keeping it simple. And I'm using that that ProColour Flesh Pink as being my lighter color on it. And there is my dark indigo for the shadow, so I use that. And now it's time to blend out with OMS. Now work out that color around the wall before having to clean off my brush and then go back up and do a different color. Now with the vase, I try to stay away from blending anything in the vase because it's so tiny and it's just really delicate. I did maybe a little bit where the bottom was, but I didn't really hit up like the flowers, like doing some blending on it, because I did not want to darken those flowers and I didn't want to smear them out. So just a little bit here and there. You don't have to do it everywhere. Now I'm doing the same thing. I'm using that Castell Earth to get that rich brown for the table that the cheese is on. Using some of the dark indigo to create the darker of the holes in the cheese. And then you see me use the light on this front side and then the light on the top. Well, I wanted the lightest part to be on top, but adding some of that lighter color to the side there, then I can go back over it with like the dark flesh 5%, and it'll make it a little bit lighter or you know, I can go over it with a 40% and it'll make it a little lighter, as long as it's kind of like paint. Whenever you add white to a color to make it lighter, I kind of do the same thing with my color pencils. So sometimes I'll put down a lighter color, like that really light color, and then I'll put something else on top of it to kind of lighten it. And there I am doing it with the sky. Not working it completely down to the bottom, but very close. So that way I got that transitioning color. You see that Castle Earth has that rich brown to it. I really do like it. Now I'm going back over these clouds, putting a little bit more of the darker color on top, and then working my way on down to the lighter color. And then putting some more brighter highlights on those clouds. And see, I try to work over the little hamster with some highlights, but it didn't really show up too much. So I was like, okay, so that tooth of the paper right there is pretty much filled. So the best thing that I could do by adding more detail would be just to hold off, wait to the end, whenever I get done with everything on my base layers, spray the whole picture down with that brush and pencil texture fixative, and then I can go back in and add those little nitpicky little highlights here and there. So it'll be able to stick, because it actually adds a little bit of a grainy tooth to the paper. So it's no worries there. Now I'm going back over it again, adding my second layer after I'd done the mineral spirits, the OMS. Adding a sharper line. And of course I didn't bring a ruler with me on my travels, so yeah, I was making all those lines and trying to make them as straight as I possibly can. And that's still that Arctic pencil that I'm going over everything with. And there is my Derwent Drawing Chinese white, which is a very opaque white. And I use that to go around the edges of the picture to kind of add that little pop to it. So it's definitely, you can see it is brighter than the Arctic. So that's what you want. You don't want to add, you know, your white, your brightest highlight as being white, because then you can't add those little highlights that you need to make the picture pop. So save that to last. Now here's another adjustment that I did on this. In the reference photo, it had like two journals stacked on top of each other. There's my makeshift pencil, or my makeshift ruler. And I decided that instead of having two notebooks stacked on top of each other and one of them opened, I decided to go ahead and make it all one book. Funny story. I know you guys are probably looking at this thinking, boy, you cannot draw a straight line, can you? It is really waved out, huh? Well, actually, it ended up being a straight line. That there was because of where I was at before was more of colder weather, more, you know, freezing cold, to I went to South Carolina and it ended up being like 70 some odd degrees with humidity, and humidity actually affected the paper. It made it more like kind of like watercolor, you know, it had added moisture to it, so it kind of bubbled in some areas. There's the colors I'm showing you that I'm going to do for the book, like the sienna, the Venetian red. And they're the type of browns. It's still got a brownish tone to it, but it's got a red. It's a red, so it's like a reddish brown. I wanted to make the book kind of pop. But anyways, back to what I was saying about the moisture. Anyways, I just want to cut that really short. It really did make my paper bubble, but the thing is once I waited till all the OMS was dry, I actually went over it with a little bit of a hair dryer, and it ended up going completely back flat again. So it definitely took out the bubble from it. So it was like no worries. It was just climate change of where I was at. Anywho, right now I am working with those color reddish browns so that way I can make this book pop. I wanted it to be like not completely different. I still wanted those browns throughout the whole entire picture. And the way to make it stand out and being reddish was adding like the reddish browns, like the sienna. I used the sienna in it as being the lightest color. I used the Venetian red as being more of the medium color. I used a burnt sienna. That's another like brownish red. And then I think one of my darkest colors that I used for like some of the shadowing was the sepia red. And that one actually came out of the Derwent Drawing one. But as you can see, I kind of put my darker colors right along the edges. And then I ended up making like the darker colors kind of come up along where basically the light doesn't hit it, and made those really dark. And that's going to really pop once you add the OMS. Like it'll all come together. There I'm adding some more of the darker color to it, more of the darker reds. You got to put several layers down in order for that OMS to work. If you put down a light layer, you're going to have some really gritty stuff. Doesn't look like it's working. So make sure you add plenty of color pencil to it before you add the OMS. And there I am blending it out. And you can see my dark edge line. So that's where I want it on the book, to kind of give it that rounded edge look. Working in small little circles, just back and forth. Now, whenever it comes to working in circles, if you're coming up like right in here where I'm close to the edge of the map and I'm wanting not to go in a circle and like blend the reddish into it, I ended up going with a straight line with my brush. So that way I get that more clean, fine edge to it. So I didn't want to go into the brown of the map. So now I'm starting on my shadow. And how I did this for the book was I used my dark indigo, and I would basically take it, and the dark indigo would be closest to the book. So there I'm like putting it in. Actually, that's the dark brown. There's the dark indigo. So I'm kind of outlining the darkest point closest to the book, all the way down with the dark indigo. And I work this in stages. So it goes dark indigo closest to the book where it's really dark. And as you come away from the book, you want to start gradually getting lighter. So dark indigo to maybe a castle earth or a dark flesh, then castle earth. Just kind of work your way out and then start getting a little lighter as you come away from the book. The darkest point is going to be closest to the book. So that way you can see that transition. That's what you want to see. You want to see a transition between dark to light. Now here I'm adding in some of my browns for the dark shadows, like my darkest browns. And after I went ahead and did that, I noticed that it wasn't really quite dark enough. So then, of course, because it was really dark, like almost pitch black in the reference photos. So I went back and added my dark indigo in that. I didn't go straight to black. I went to dark indigo. And I didn't go all the way out with the dark indigo. I kind of took it in the darkest points. And here I'm doing that, and then using my darker reddish brown for the shadow around the edge line there. And around the edge of the notebook that's open, of course, I use the dark indigo on that. Around the very closest part, like the darkest point. And then as I work away, then it gets lighter and lighter. So I wanted to make sure here that I had enough pigment down on the paper before I start using my OMS. Which, there we go. So there I am going back and forth, kind of creating that, and very lightly, that nice sharp edge. Then kind of creating that shadow, bringing it on out, the color on out. Going into that deeper, darker section, shadowy section there. Running it very, very carefully around that edge because I didn't want to get too much, like swoop up and just get a big smear of, you know, that darker color into those light pages, because they're really light. They're like a light tan. There I'm using my dark indigo to kind of line out the edge line of the notebook that's open. Using my Derwent Drawing sepia red as being the darkest color, like for the round, around the edge away from the dark indigo. And then coming back through with a little bit lighter of the dark browns, or the reddish browns. So transitioning from dark to a little lighter to a little lighter as I come out. And if it wasn't dark enough, like I've always said in like part 1 and part 2, it's always okay to start out lighter because you can always get darker. But it's harder to go lighter once you are dark. So whenever I noticed that if it wasn't dark enough, I could always go back in with a little, very lightly, a little bit of black. All right, and so there we have it. So next time will be part 4 and working all the details and finishing off this piece. I hope to see you again, and if you liked it, please leave a like and a subscribe. I'd love to see you again next time. So, bye!